Everybody, welcome in to Bayou Time. Harry McCullough here. We're going to spend a little time with State Representative Jerome Zerignue, District 52's in the house, man. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Harry.
Yeah, good to see you. How was everything? I mean, y'all got everything accomplished y'all needed to this last session?
Past session, we were pretty successful. In terms of the funds that were available for this region, we did better than most throughout the state. And fortunately, because of the need, but I think because of the support of the speaker and the others, we were able to accomplish a lot this session.
Yeah, I know a lot of the local politicians here, that's the first thing they say is like, man, we got a great delegation who really took care of us. And one of the reasons we had to is because we got smoked by a storm a year ago. Hopefully, we're already into September, although that's the most, August, September, that's usually the busy time. So let's knock on wood on that.
Yeah, knock on wood for sure. And it's fortunate the way it looks now, at least for the next week or two, we should be okay. As long as we can get through that.
Get a few cold fronts in here, we'll be doing all right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about recovery for Hurricane Ida, and how's the area and how's your district specifically doing?
The district is doing better. Every day it gets a little bit better, but there is no doubt the people are experiencing still the problems associated primarily with insurance. Mm-hmm. We learned a lot from the storm and incorporated some innovative opportunities for housing and things that previously FEMA and the state hadn't done in terms of advancing some of the housing efforts. We had the Homeland Security Secretary come in a couple weeks ago with the governor, and they were talking about how they appreciate what was done here. And again, credit to our GOSA, Governor's Office of Homeland Security, the EOC here in the parish, and others who worked hard to do that, but it provided an opportunity to try something different. FEMA, it's unfortunate, it takes so long in terms of getting housing, and people are in desperate need. So advancing some of those efforts were important, in so much as now FEMA has used it. There was a disaster in Kentucky, and basically used the same model that was developed here after Ida, and utilized it in Kentucky to help people in that state get into housing. So that was good, but still we're addressing some of the issues. We were able last session, you were talking about last session, we put $33 million to this region. Previous year, when Laura hit, we were able to allocate about $40 million for Lake Charles. Well, we were hit pretty hard, so we were able to work with folks in our delegation to allocate around $33 million that are going to be used specifically for municipalities, state entities, or political subdivisions of the state that can apply for these dollars. That either if their FEMA funds and their insurance had made them whole, if there's still a gap, it could close that gap to make them whole again. It's going to be important for fire companies, businesses, communities, and it's going to help with schools and others to get them back on their feet and try to close up some of that gap.
Yeah, obviously it comes at a tough time. We all also talk, it seems like every day on this show, we're talking about 2 years of lockdowns and a pandemic right into a hurricane, which is actually now kind of jump-starting us a little bit, because, a lot of folks after a pandemic, it's same kind of deal, right? You got all that money comes from the feds, and then now you got to get going. But we almost got a little jump start, although it's far, to rebuild,
Yeah, well, that's the problem, is that some of it is to rebuild, but the reality is, in a lot of cases, when it comes to schools and others that were either underinsured or do not have sufficient funds, there won't be either. The problem, in addition to just the funding, is contractors. I know in talking to the superintendents,
they got to be big. Yeah.
Well, that problem is the cost associated with everything, with inflation and the economy the way it is now. Apart from the fact that the FEMA funds aren't going to be sufficient, the cost of everything is going up. And so that's just another burden on trying to, an impediment to rebuilding, because the money that you thought was going to get you where you needed to be is not going to be enough. So they have to come up with additional dollars or delay the project.
Right. And you're right. And then, post-pandemic, you don't have labor. Labor costs are much more expensive with inflation. So all of that goes into it. I know these superintendents would love to concentrate on education instead of being contractors right now, because that's what they've kind of been for the last couple of years, for sure. So we talked a little bit about insurance and underinsurance for schools, but is that kind of working for everybody? I know, you still see a lot of roofs that aren't done yet. A lot of people still living in in their trailers, you know, a year later. So is insurance working for everybody?
I know a lot of people are still fighting the insurance companies and struggling in terms of trying to get their funds in terms of what was provided for their policies or the policies that they had, having the companies either honor them or get the money to where they can at least
A lot
rebuild
of them
it.
went bankrupt too,
Yeah,
right?
and a lot of them left.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a tough time. We got a minute to go in this segment, but your background obviously is coming from levies and districts and all like that. How are we with that? And it seems like we did pretty good from that standpoint. This wasn't a flood storm, but our flood seems to be doing okay.
Well, there's no doubt the flood protection system they have right now, credit to the levy district and the parish for what they've done, and it provided a significant benefit in terms of the amount of impacts that were reduced. There's still ways to go, but we were talking about this past session, we were able to provide funds to advance and give the levy district some funds to continue their work on the projects. And every day it gets a little bit better, and the more protection we put, it's obvious that it separates us from the storm, puts us in a better position to weather the storms in the future.
If we could only let FEMA know that, right? And the 2.0 map says that's a big hole.
And the fact that they're not giving us credit, it's ridiculous that they won't give us credit for it right now, which that is a whole nother issue. You
Right,
could do
sure.
segments on
Right,
risk
right.
rating 2.0, and the problem is it's causing for the people in the region and the costs associated with it.
One of your big assignments is to be on the appropriations committee, which was great. You know, you tell where the money's going to go. But there's an estimating committee right now of 4 people, I guess you said, that'll be deciding how much money we'll have going forward, which may be changing. And again, some of the things we talked about the last 3 years, we've got a lot of influx of money coming in from the feds. And then we kind of got to, I guess that's to get everybody going, and we got to start standing on our own a little bit. So the money may be changing the next couple of years?
Well, the budget is going to change in terms of what the projections are and the shortfall. Fortunately, we anticipate that next year will be okay. It's the next fiscal year that we have. The Revenue Estimating Conference has 4 people. It is the administration, the Commissioner of Administration, Jay Darden, the President of the Senate, Paige Cortez, and the Speaker, Clay Scheck-Snyder, and then there's an economist that sit on it, and they basically look at the fiscal office in the House, and the administration have their own economists that project, look at all the other things, which has come is a far way in terms of how we project what the budget's going to be. Previously, 15, 20 years ago, the governor sat around with a group of folks and said, we believe we're going to have, $4 billion. Let's budget $4 billion. Okay, that's what they did. They budgeted $4 billion. But now with the fiscal office, the state fiscal office, the administration, and the projections, and they look at long-range forecasting and other things that actually put a little bit science method to the madness in terms of what the projections based on anticipated income. The biggest sources of income for the state or sales tax and personal income tax. So looking at the economy and the projections, the forecast, which will come out on Thursday, is when they'll meet. They meet several times through the year to ensure that the budget is on track and what was projected, and you can adjust it if there's a projected deficit or if there's additional revenue that you can then for next year utilize. But next year, it looks like next fiscal year that we should be okay, but what's happening on the following fiscal year, so we'll be we're in fiscal year 23, we'll be in fiscal year 24 when we go back to session, this upcoming session. And the interesting thing about that is there was legislation that was passed. It was good legislation. I know one of our delegation, Representative McGee, was one of the lead authors on that will rededicate sales tax dollars from auto sales to infrastructure projects, roads and other critical infrastructure. We have a $14 billion backlog on roads and bridges in the state. It's just expensive to do that kind of stuff in Louisiana. So 30% on the first year, and then it's going to go up to 60%, which will equate to about $300 million that are currently going to the state general fund is now going to go. It's going to serve a good purpose, but that's a hole that traditionally or typically we would use for the state general fund for budget of the government, funding the government. In addition, the following year, the the quarter cent sales tax is going to end as well, and that's going to be a hole of about $466 million or $500 million. So within 2 years, there's going to be a $700 million hole in the budget. Now, we've been anticipating some of that, and some of the things, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but we've been utilizing the funding that we've had, even though it's recurring dollars, on one-time expenses, things that we had to pay back FEMA, things that were expenses of the state, that next, if the economy continues to improve, that'll be available to the state general fund. So it'll kind of offset that projected deficit. Now, if the economy improves to where it's $700 million, then it'll be a wash. We don't anticipate that. But if the economy will improve, although with inflation and all the other indicators that things are slowing down a bit, we may have a problem.
Well, yeah, and it's such a volatile time, right? And you know, in our economy, right? And I know oil and gas has got to be right up there, revenues and all that's got to be up there with income tax and sales tax and some of those other ones, I would imagine.
Not as much as it used to be.
Yeah. But what's going on in Russia and you know, which may happen down the road, some of that may change too. You know, we may be making a little more money. So good, they can adjust it. They meet every 4 months.
Right, and it would be a lot better if the current federal administration would allow us to utilize our resources, and that's a whole nother issue. But the fact of the matter is, there is a reticence on the part of oil and gas companies to go out to do things based upon the current administration position. Yeah, and so not only does it affect our economy, it affects from the national security perspective and all the other things as well. So,
when they say they want to kill fossil fuels, it's hard to invest in it, right? And the investment levels that you have to. But I think and again, not to get into geopolitics, but it looks like we might be in for a real bad winter in Europe this year if what's starting to happen is happening in Europe. So I think that could affect us, and obviously midterm elections could also change the fortunes of some of that. So it'll be real interesting. So what's the other big things coming at the back half of this year as we finish out?
Well, as we're closing out this fiscal year, again, some of the things that are fortunately for us, the unemployment trust fund we've shored that back up, which is good. So that means that employees and employers will not experience a tax or additional funds that they would have to put to the unemployment trust fund, because we put there's thresholds that are in there that if you reach those thresholds, you don't have to impose those additional dollars. So that's in good standing. So if we have also low unemployment in Louisiana, which is good on a national, compared to the national scale. We're doing relatively well for employment in Louisiana.
What's the political climate of Louisiana? We know what it kind of is around the nation right now, but is Louisiana kind of missing out a little bit? We do have a shared government when we have a Democratic governor and we have a Republican House and Senate. It doesn't seem, it actually seems cool, you know, as far as things go for Louisiana anyway.
Well, I think now the focus is on the governor's race that's coming up, and all indications are that it's going to be a Republican governor next term. So primarily because of the fact we haven't heard of any Democrat candidate or potential Democrat. A few names have been floated around, but I don't think anyone that creates excitement or has the potential, considering the three candidates and others who haven't announced yet.
When do you have to qualify for that?
For governor, it's going to be next spring for qualifications. But, you know, with the governor, it's going to start heating up relatively soon. Yeah, fund rule, that's kind of
what they're doing now, and you have to have a certain amount of funds to make a run for it. So, that'll be an interesting thing. And what does that do to the rest of when you have a governor's race? You know, you've always seen CEOs, right? And you back one, and if your guy doesn't get it, everybody else is out. You know, and I guess that's how elections are a lot of times too. It's like we got to decide, especially if it's all three Republicans or whatever. Like, I got to kind of cast my lot with a guy, or can you just stay neutral?
Well, the unfortunate reality is in politics, to the spoils go the victor kind of thing, like everything else in life. But for the most part, I think there are three candidates that everybody's talking about. There's, you know, obviously Attorney General Landry, Nungesser, and then Treasurer John Schroeder. But I'm more than likely there will be another candidate. I think after the fall congressional elections, it'll play out that maybe either Congressman Graves or maybe Senator Cassidy may throw their hat in. There's been talk about that, and some other names that people have kind of battered about. But I don't think the field is set just yet, so it'll make for an interesting race. So it's going to start heating up relatively soon.
Right. Would that play? I guess you'd run for office, and then you could run for governor too, right? It's like, say it's the Graves, and I guess it's Kennedy that's on the other side. His election's up, so is Graves, right? That's always every 2 years. Mm-hmm. But if they could get reelected and then run for office?
Well, the Senate's every 6. So,
right,
yeah.
No, I know.
But yeah, Graves is every 2 years.
Right.
But if he's going to more than likely win this fall, but he doesn't have to give up his seat to run for governor. So he could conceivably, if it doesn't pan out, that he could be the congressman still, and the same for Senator Cassidy. And there's still talk that Senator Kennedy may run. So it's going to be interesting. The field hadn't been set yet.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I think that's what everybody seems to be waiting for, because candidates. I'm not going to grade the other guys running for office right now, but it seems like everybody's kind of waiting for somebody else.
Well, yeah, and football's big. Everybody got excited. Unfortunately, LSU lost the other night, and everybody's geeked up about football, which is great. And the Saints are going to play this weekend. Looking forward to that, but. Politics is a blood sport in Louisiana, and it is going to get interesting. Yeah,
it's definitely full contact for sure. So nationally, though, you think that'll have any play of what's happening in Mar-a-Lago, and then Biden, whether his coattails are short or long? Would that affect our state? And I guess we're more of a red state than anything else. So nationally, I guess we don't even really play that much nationally.
Well, I think it's going to have its influence in terms of who backs who, and there was a discussion in terms of how Trump's influence is going to affect races. In some cases, it's helped some candidates up north, and in some cases, it doesn't necessarily have that factor. So to that extent, I think there is going to be some of that in play when it comes to the governor, because some of them will use, there's a couple candidates will use it to their advantage if they can, and I'm sure the president or ex-president is inclined to be able to provide support one way or the other, considering the fact that he's still talking about maybe running for president again, so who knows?
Right. So it will be interesting. It sure wouldn't, it would be nice to kind of move past some of that stuff, but you either pro-Trump or anti-Trump. You don't even see who anybody else is in the race, So we'll see what happens. Before we do, we talked a little bit about the FEMA 2.0 maps. Mm-hmm. Now, what can they do to help us on that? And I know they're always talking about, well, we need to change things. Would that make any difference if we have a Republicans in charge of the House and Senate?
Yes, it could potentially have a significant impact. The problem is, and we've asked folks, leaders around the state who have asked to try to get information from FEMA to work with our delegation, our congressional delegation. Our senators and congressmen have been asking FEMA to provide more information or justification on why they're using or how they're using Risk Rating 2.0, but it's almost like the black box. We can't get the formula, what they're using, or how they're giving credit for things. Like we talked about our levee system. Right. It's unfortunate, but there's no doubt that we should have a significant benefit in this region for the hurricane protection system that's in place. And the benefit, even though it's not complete, it's obvious based on the past storm how important it was, and saved the federal government tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of potential impact. So that should be factored in. So it can, if provided there is some change in the federal government, they can have an influence, and hopefully that will benefit the people in the region. Yeah,
no doubt. And we may have some guys that are kind of set for leadership positions too. When he comes from Louisiana, Scalise comes to mind, and maybe some of those other guys that may be in charge. But yeah, you're right. Well, last year, obviously last year we got really hit. The year before that, we were in the eye, we're in the cone 6 times or whatever. So, it really made a difference to have that levee protection, and something I know you're proud of. Well, Jerome, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me, Harry.
All right, we'll be right back with more Bite Time right after this.